What's up, everybody? Welcome to the video. Chris Pennell here, going over our wide receiver tier rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season. And let's not waste any time. Let's get right into it. We're going to start off with the S tier. We have 3 players. I'll be honest, there's a few wide receivers that I think could be in the S tier, but if we just invite everybody, it defeats the purpose of the S tier. These guys separate themselves from the pack, and these are the guys that I believe in the most this season. And no surprise at Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb. This is the consensus top 3. And it's basically in this order. I think you can almost make a case for switching CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson personally, but the margins are so razor thin, I don't really think it was worth changing. But you guys don't need me to tell you that they're good at football. If they're available, you take them. But this is fantasy football, and we like to look at the numbers, and we like to hype guys up, so let's do it. We'll start with Jamar Chase. I had him last year. I believe I had him at pick 9. Obviously, people were concerned about the contract situation, so the Bengals were kind of dipping down boards a bit. And I ended up getting a pretty cheap Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow stack, and I made it to the Super Bowl. I unfortunately lost, but it was still a great year. And I mean, I can pretty much thank it to my Bengals stack here of Jamar Chase leading the way, over 400 fantasy points last season. For reference, guys get hurt, so I like to look at a points per game basis, which he was still number 1, of course, at 23.7. But for cumulative points throughout the entire season, because the best thing you can have is availability, which Jamar Chase definitely has. The guy in second was Amon-Ra St. Brown. He had 318. We're talking almost nearly 100 fantasy points more than the guy in second. And Justin Jefferson was not too far behind, as you can see right beside him, sitting at 317. He was second in targets per game last year, second in receptions, first in receiving yards at 100, first in receiving touchdowns. 0 bad games last year. That is incredible. He is not losing you weeks. 2 average games, 4 good games, but the kicker here, 11 elite games, no one was even close. 65% of the time give you an elite game. That is extremely good fantasy value. And while you can make a case for going with, say, a Bijan Robinson or a Saquon Barkley, because it's really hard for guys to repeat seasons like this, I don't think there's a safer bet in fantasy football than Jamar Chase this year. The situation for the Bengals is not changing. The defense is going to be bad. Joe Burrow, T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, they're going to be chucking the ball. That's where all the money is in this offense. They want to get their use out of these players, and I threw the ball more than any team last season. So when you're giving me the best wide receiver talent in the game, paired with the best, maybe the best arm talent quarterback in the game with a bad defense, this is what happens. You get seasons like last year because it's the absolute perfect math formula to equate to fantasy points. Justin Jefferson, he comes in at number 2. I think it's very close between him and CeeDee Lamb. I'm a little bit worried about the rookie quarterback situation, but we've seen many times it does not matter who the quarterback is for Justin Jefferson. He can produce fantasy goodness. We've seen it with Sam Darnold. I've even seen it with Nick Mullins. So I'm not really going to be that concerned. Obviously, JJ McCarthy, drafted early in the first round. They think he has upside coming off the injury from last season. But if you did switch the situations for Jamar Chase and Justin Jefferson, I would 100% select Justin Jefferson first, because quarterback and just anything in general, especially that bad defense, can make a huge difference. But that is not the case, unfortunately, for him. But these are 2 Hall of Famers. Only 18.6 fantasy points per game. I say only just because compared to Jamar Chase, that seems like a lot less. It's 5 spots lower in the rankings, coming in at 6. But still the third most fantasy points last season from the wide receiver position. I feel very comfortable with Justin Jefferson on my team. And then CeeDee Lamb. I think it's going to be a nice bounce back season for the passing attack for this Dallas Cowboys offense. Obviously lost Dak Prescott for the majority of last season. Had to have Cooper Rush throwing the football, which is never the most exciting thing in the world. 8th in fantasy points last season, the wide receiver position, 10th in fantasy points per game. I think the Dallas Cowboys passing attack is going to be pretty good this year. I don't think their defense is going to be that great. I think they're going to have to try to keep themselves in games. And there's just no run game here. We have Javonte Williams, Miles Sanders. Dak Prescott doesn't really run the football. He's going to have to drop back to the ball. George Pickens will keep some pressure, at least off of CeeDee Lamb, when he's not being an idiot on the field and maybe getting himself off. But the volume's going to be there, the talent's there, and Dak Prescott, while not being the best quarterback in the world, is good enough to get him the football, as we have seen time and time again beforehand. Dropping down to the A tier, as I said, for the S tier, it's an exclusive club that we don't want to invite too many people to. But the A tier, it's the door's wide open, anybody can come in. And all these guys have wide receiver 1 overall upside. And there's just not much separating them at this point. Once we get past the elite few of like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, and CeeDee Lamb, all these guys are pretty interchangeable. I'm going to start with Puka. I had him last year. Absolutely loved it when he wasn't injured. Even then, when he kind of got hurt at the midpoint of last season at the end, he still came back and was perfectly fine. And he's basically 4th, 5th in every single category here. 4th in receiving yards, 5th in targets last season, 4th in receptions, 4th in fantasy points per game. The fantasy total was a little bit lower because he did miss some time. But when he's on the field, he was elite. Matthew Stafford loves him. He's his new Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp is now gone, although they did bring in, I would say, probably a major upgrade at this point, Devontae Adams, who's still in the lower end of his career, back end of his career, I should say. And he will be useful in that offense to a degree, but Puka is still Matthew Stafford's love child. Now, the problem is Matthew is getting quite up there in age, and if he gets hurt, anything happens to him, Puka Nakua's value is completely dead. So keep that in mind. Pray for Matthew Stafford's health if you do draft Puka Nakua, because that situation is definitely not going to be quite as nice. Amon-Ra St. Brown, the second overall fantasy wide receiver last season, 5th in points per game, and he's just nice and steady, although I don't love drafting Amon-Ra St. Brown myself. I still think he deserves to be up here because he doesn't miss time. He's consistently on the field. He has really good red zone usage. The touchdown upside is always going to be there. He's 5th in receiving touchdowns per game last year. But Jameson Williams is on the rise. They're definitely using him a bit more. We do have some more outdoor games for Jared Goff this season, which, as we know, tends to lead to less fantasy points. That's something to be on the lookout for. I still have him as a top 5 wide receiver, so I don't mean to shame him or shit on him in any way possible. I'm just saying maybe pump the brakes a little bit. I'm not expecting a super elite season from Amon-Ra, but he should be consistent enough. 53% elite games last year, 29% good, and really did not bust. He had one bad game last year, same with Puka Nakua. Both had pretty similar outcomes, although Amon-Ra did have more elite games overall because he played more, but both right around 55% clip as far as percentages. So, like I said, I don't love drafting Amon-Ra myself, but if you have him on your team, it's not like, oh, you have Amon-Ra. It's like, yeah, solid, steady, wide receiver 1. Nico Collins, I like him a lot this year. I think the floor is high and the ceiling's to the moon. We know he's a super talented wide receiver, and everyone's vacated. They are gone. Dalton Schultz sucks. He's there, but not the greatest guy in the world. But Tank Dell is dead. Stephon Diggs is over in New England. That leads to Nico Collins just being the lone man standing. They did draft Jaden Higgins, and they got a couple other warm bodies on the offense. But Nico Collins is going to be a target hog, and when you can get me a talented wide receiver getting targets, CJ Stroud definitely took a step back last season. Hopefully we can improve upon last year. Rookie year was great. If we can get rookie year CJ Stroud back and maybe make some strides off of that, Nico Collins could be the wide receiver 1 this season. I don't like the Texans offense as much as the Cincinnati Bengals or the Minnesota Vikings, of course. That's why it's a little bit lower, but I like Nico Collins a lot this season. Moving on to our next group here, we have a couple of LSU wide receivers and Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas. Wide receiver U, both these guys, incredible talents. Both great last year in the rookie seasons, and I mean, they should only get better. I like Malik Neighbors this year. My only concern is the quarterback situation. We have Russell Wilson. We have Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston would be the nuts here. Let's root for Jameis Winston, but you also have Jackson Dart at some point, and the Giants are a bit of a mess. So the team sucks. They should be playing from behind at least, so we should see a lot of second half targets, which is nice. He was first in targets last season at 11.3 per game, 3rd in receptions, 6th in fantasy points overall, and 8th in fantasy points per game. And it's not like he had good quarterbacks last year. I mean, that situation was even worse. I mean, we had Tommy DeVito at one point, so I think he's still a surefire wide receiver 1 this season. The talent, the volume, and that's all we can ask for. If you get volume, that's the best thing we can get. And obviously, if you're talented, that's just icing on the cake, which is basically what all of these guys have in common. That's why they're in the A&S tier. Brian Thomas, the main thing I like about Brian Thomas, well, first off, he was great last year, 5th in fantasy points overall at the wide receiver position. But Liam Cohen coming in for Jacksonville, we saw what he did with Tampa Bay last season, and obviously that offense I would say is a bit better. Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, although his ankle exploded, and you have some other guys on that team. But I still think this is a great thing for the Jaguars offense, and Brian Thomas another year with Trevor Lawrence. They did bring in Travis Hunter, but that's like a weird situation since he can play both sides of the ball. Brian Thomas is their alpha. He is their wide receiver 1. I don't think that's going to be changing. And Drake London, what we saw with Michael Penix was great last season. We're talking 8, 13, and 18 targets to end the season. Of course, the game versus Carolina Panthers really boosted some of these Atlanta Falcons numbers up, but we can't just not count it. I mean, it was a great game. You just can't take out all the best players' great games and be like, well, yeah, they would suck if you take away their best games. Yeah, no shit, right? But London's got the talent. He's going to have the volume. His 4th in total fantasy points last season at the wide receiver position, 14th in points per game, 6th in targets, 12th in receiving yards. I think he's just a really good low-end wide receiver 1 this season with Michael Penix under center. And A.J. Brown, he's not really someone I am looking to draft personally. The talent is elite. He is one of the best overall talents in the wide receiver position out of all these guys. I mean, I think he's a better wide receiver than almost everyone we've talked about so far outside of maybe the top 3. The only issue is the Philadelphia Eagles game plan has been run. Are we close enough? If yes, run. Maybe you get a throw to A.J. Brown if it's like 3rd and 6. Maybe. But even then, if they get the first down, which they probably do, it's run. Next thing you know, half the quarter's gone. half is gone by that point, and you're really just hoping AJ Brown with the 6 targets that he gets is his usual efficient self, which that's what AJ Brown lives off of. He doesn't get the most targets in the world. He's not Malik Neighbors. He's not getting you those 11, 12 targets a game. He's getting 6, 7, 8 targets, but they're usually very efficient, and it could be around 80, 100 yards. He could get that touchdown. So that's the only issue with AJ Brown. For me, I feel much safer with guys. They get peppered with targets, opportunities, teams that have worse defenses, because we know the Eagles' defense is incredible and they can just control the game, milk the clock. It gets very annoying very quick. Then we got the B tier, and the list is growing. We're talking roughly around 40 wide receivers. So it's not like quarterback and running back where we can have a tighter group, because we're talking about 20 to 30. Fortunately, there's a lot of wide receivers. I'm in a 2 wide receiver league with 2 flexes, and typically those 2 flexes are filled with the wide receiver position because there's more of them and it's easier to get them. But we'll start off with Ladd McConkey here. McConkey is what I like to call him, and great rookie season. And I think we're going to see more of the same, if not a little bit better out of a Ladd here. Justin Herbert absolutely loved him last season. They showed good chemistry, and while his overall numbers are amazing, 7 targets per game, 5 receptions. We saw the upside later part of the season. I think Ladd is one of the safer bets. I think his floor will be very good. Only 6% bad games last year, 25% elite, 38% good. Ladd should be very safe, which maybe not the highest ceiling in the world, but if you're looking for a nice, safer option, like if you can get Ladd as your wide receiver too, I'd absolutely love that. Tyreek Hill, bit of a down season last year, was great. Hit the handcuff Sally week 1 after he got arrested, but outside of that, there wasn't really too much like out of Tyreek Hill, especially for the draft pick, the premium pick that you had to put on Tyreek Hill. He was absolutely a devastation to your team. He was 17th in wide receiver points last year, 33rd in points per game at 12.8, 30th in targets per game, 32nd in receptions per game. Now keep in mind, 2 was out for a little bit, but even then, Tyreek was still not somebody you could really trust. 38th in receiving yards per game and 41st in receiving touchdowns. 3 bad games last season, which was right around 20% of the time. Only 29% elite games, 12% good, 41% average. That was the killer for Tyreek Hill. I think he's going to bounce back a bit. It's not going to be to the point where he's your overall wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 overall like we saw in seasons past, but I definitely think he's going to be better than what we saw last season. Then T. Higgins. The only issue with T. Higgins is availability. He's not always healthy, and when he's out, it's just a major boost to Jamar Chase because he's just getting all the targets in the world. But even at the same time, when T. Higgins is on, it does help Jamar Chase out just because he can get some extra pressure off of him. But these are 2 very talented wide receivers. T is not Jamar Chase, but still a very high, nearly a first-round pick. And you have Joe Burrow throwing the ball. There's enough targets to go around to make both these guys very high assets. And in fantasy, he was 10th in receiving yards per game last year, 7th in targets, 8th in receptions. He was also 6th in fantasy points per game, and 2nd in receiving touchdowns per game. So while T is the wide receiver 2 on his own team, he is still just as good as some of these other guys that are wide receiver 1s on their own team. Then we have the old man, Mike Evans, old but reliable, still a 1,000-yard machine. He's in his age 32 season, 12th in points per game last year, 12th in overall points. Did have that nagging hamstring issue for a little bit, but in this offense with Baker Mayfield, he's always going to be able to hit on that home run ball. And what we can always count on with Mike Evans is the touchdowns. Now, if the touchdowns ever go away, we're in trouble, because last year he was 23rd in targets, 19th in receptions per game, 16th in receiving yards, which is still fine. But what always boosts him up is 3rd in touchdowns per game at nearly 0.8 last season. Chris Godwin's definitely looking very iffy coming off that injury. Ankle exploded last season. They brought in Ibuka, which he doesn't play the same kind of style that Mike Evans does. Mike Evans is not your short possession wide receiver. He can be a possession wide receiver, but he's definitely that guy that can hit the home run ball. And if that goes away, not going to be pretty. But he always has upside of giving you those 30-plus point weeks. If you're looking at last year, 14% bad games, 36% average, but 43% elite. He can win you a week. He can get you those 36 points with 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, because him and Baker hit 2 50-yard touchdowns. That's always going to be a play. He's a big body, and when we're on the goal line, he's always going to get usage. Then we have a couple of Ohio State wide receivers here in JSN and Marvin Harrison. The Seattle Seahawks offense is very weird to me because they brought in Cooper Kupp, which I don't really think is the best style fit with having JSN. It didn't make too much sense to me. They lost Geno Smith. They lost DK Metcalf. They're bringing in Sam Darnold, who was great in Minnesota last year, although this is a much worse situation, in my opinion. Over in Seattle, the offensive line isn't that great. I think he's pretty safe. I do have him pretty high here. He's like in the mid-range for the wide receiver 2 range, which, perfectly fine. I'm okay with having JSN. I just think the ceiling is somewhat capped here, but 10th in fantasy points overall last year, 22nd in points per game. I think he's a safe bet for roughly around 15-ish fantasy points per week. And if he gets to the end zone, that's where we get into the 20s. Marvin Harrison, he was a big draft bust last year. Definitely did not return on value. 11.6 fantasy points per game last year. That put him at 44th, 29th in fantasy points overall at the wide receiver position. You were drafting him pretty back end wide receiver around 1 last year, early round 2, and that was definitely not the outcome that you got. 48th in receptions per game at 3.6. 6.8 targets per game, which put him at 37th. He did have really good red zone, end zone usage, which is what we're looking for. We just couldn't really connect too often. 25th in touchdowns per game. You have to assume him and Kyler are going to have better chemistry this year, and it's only going to get better. And the talent's there. I mean, Ohio State wide receivers, they are usually very good, especially a guy like Marvin Harrison, who is very highly talented, really great prospect. So the upside is there. That's why he's up here. Just he can be very up or down. I mean, talking about a guy that 35% bad games last year, only 12% elite, 18% average, and 35% good. And while JSN doesn't seem too exciting, even last year he had 41% elite games compared to the 12% for Marvin Harrison. Then final 3 here, you're going to see they're going to say they're on the wrong teams. I realize. Devontae Adams is on the Rams. DK Metcalf is on the Pittsburgh Steelers. I'm pulling in their old headshots, and they have not yet updated using the source that I scrape. So unfortunately, they say New York Jets for Adams, set out for DK Metcalf, but Pittsburgh, Rams, I think you guys get the idea. But anyway, Devontae Adams. I know we just talked about Mike Evans getting old. Adams is actually a little bit older, not by much, but hasn't really shown too much decline. And even last year, obviously a different situation. 36% average games, only 7% bad, but 43% elite. That's still a decent clip for Adams. And I would say he's going into a better situation. And if Puka Nacua gets injured, which he has shown he has been able to do that in the past, Adams is firmly a wide receiver 1 with Matthew Stafford, assuming he is healthy. Which, at his age, it could always go downhill quite quickly. But I still think Adams is fine. Even with Puka Nacua on the field, Matthew Stafford has shown that he can support 2 pretty relevant fantasy wide receivers when Cooper Kupp was not as washed as he was in the previous season. So I don't mind Adams here. I think he's fine, and I think there's room for more for sure, especially if Puka ends up going down. Garrett Wilson, another Ohio State wide receiver here. The only thing I don't like is that his quarterback is Justin Fields, and Justin Fields, while he has shown that he can support a wide receiver in the past, like we saw with DJ Moore in Chicago, I would prefer a drop back quarterback style for Garrett Wilson, like an Aaron Rodgers. He was 9th in targets per game last year, 10th in receptions per game, although the fantasy output wasn't great, under 15 fantasy points, which is 20th in fantasy points per game. 9th in overall fantasy points, was able to stay on the field last season, but I'm fine with him. At this point, we're kind of banking on the talent here for Garrett Wilson. And then DK Metcalf, he gets Garrett Wilson's old quarterback, Aaron Rodgers. He's obviously up there in age. Metcalf's a talented wide receiver. Aaron Rodgers was once a very talented quarterback, not really these days, but he's still good enough to support number. I think the Garrett Wilson numbers maybe not going to be as good. I think it's going to be somewhat close to it. And the upside is going to be there. It's just the Pittsburgh Steelers offense is pretty boring, and they're going to be running the ball quite a bit. It's not exactly a pass-happy game, and I absolutely hate Arthur Smith, which I'm sure most of you do as well. So it could be an annoying situation there, but I think there's just enough in the tank for Aaron Rodgers and DK Metcalf together to make some things work week to week, although I don't think it's going to be super consistent. I think you might get some really nice boom games out of DK Metcalf, but I think the floor is pretty low. All right, C tier, longer list. At this point, you're playing matchups typically on a weekly basis. If anyone tells you there's such a big edge compared to these guys, it's bullshit. It's all it is. I mean, yes, people will sit there and tell you that the massive edge they have on Zay Flowers, ADP, blah, 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 versus Jalen Waddle and this. It's bullshit. Don't listen to that. Anyway, Terry McLaurin is going to lead us off. The problem is, just yesterday, he requested a trade, so I don't know what to do with him. If he did not request that trade, I would have had him in the B tier. Personally, for me, I think the upside's more, but I don't know where he's going. I don't know what he's going to do. I did put on the screen here, we do have the updated Vegas odds of where he's going to be playing this season, and as you can see, it's still very likely he is on the Commanders. He's obviously he wants paid. I get it. I totally get it. But next up, we have the Patriots, we have the Raiders, we have the Titans, we have the Chargers, the Jets, the Browns are even in there. I feel like those aren't the most appealing places to be. The Chargers could be a little bit fun. Titans with Cam Ward, maybe. We already have Calvin Ridley there. Raiders seems a little gross. Patriots with Drake May could be fun. They have Stephon Diggs, but I think Terry McLaurin would be the wide receiver 1 in that situation. So I'm just hoping he stays put with Jaden Daniels. 40% of league games last year, 35% good. Didn't really bust too often. He was able to get some touchdowns last season, 4th in receiving touchdowns per game. Other than that, though, it's not like he was a high volume guy. He just kind of got there, 16th in points per game at 15.8, but 29th in receptions, 34th in targets, 24th in receiving yards. Wasn't great, but he was able to get those touchdowns, which is going to save you on weeks when you don't have a huge yardage game, which is not something he did too often. So the talent's there, and I love his quarterback. It's just, where's it going? What's it doing? All right, I'm not going to talk about every single player here because we'll be here for 50 minutes, and you want to listen to me talk to 50 minutes. I don't want to talk for 50 minutes, and you're probably not even here anyway at this point, so I'm just talking to myself. So let's start to wrap this up a little bit because we're starting to get into the weeds. But Xavier Worthy and Rashee Rice, I do want to talk about these two because the Chiefs situation, obviously, we don't know what's going to happen with Rashee Rice. I'm assuming maybe like a 4-game suspension if that's going to be the case. Obviously, you got to drop him down the board. You can't draft him where you'd want to be if he was starting a full season, because that's the case. I mean, he's very high up the board. He's in the A tier for me. Rashee Rice, when healthy last season, before Patrick Mahomes took out his own wide receiver 1, he was really, really good for fantasy. He was second in points per game at 21.6. Keep in mind, smaller sample size, of course, so these numbers could drop throughout the season, but he was great. Second in points per game, fourth in targets per game, first in receptions per game, second in receiving yards per game, also eighth in receiving touchdowns, 0 bad games, 2 league games, 1 good, and that's all he did. We didn't have any games elsewhere. So it's a very small sample size, but in that small sample size, Patrick Mahomes absolutely loved getting Rashee Rice the ball. Now, Xavier Worthy, he was a rookie, so it takes a while for these guys to kind of get acclimated. They didn't really start using him until the end portion of the season and even the playoffs, and we saw when used properly, Xavier Worthy's pretty awesome. He's a great player in that system, in that offense. It's just once Rashee Rice is back and everybody's in the mix here, Travis Kelce, it's like, is there going to be enough? Because we have seen with Patrick Mahomes, for fantasy purposes, he's just a very average quarterback these days. That's what happens. Majority of the time, like last year, in all the games that he played, 11 times, he was average. You don't really get the elite games these days. He doesn't really bust. He does enough. But he can support fantasy wide receivers. He can support fantasy tight end. We know that. But it's going to be kind of a gross situation once everyone's healthy in this offense. In my head, might have been hiding him. But I do have Tet on this list, and I'm actually very excited for him this season. I actually think he might be going too late. There's a really good upside here. Bryce Young, after the benching last season, showed some real promise, and he was able to support good production from the players around him. Adam Thielen, we even saw Leggett have some solid games. It was even David Moore, Jalen Coker showed up a little bit, and obviously Chuba Hubbard in this offense. But this is a team that has a really bad defense. Historically bad last year. Maybe they're not as bad this season, but this is going to be a team that has to play catch up. And Tet was drafted 8th overall. He's got all the talent in the world. As you can see, their best comp for him is Drake London. He's a big body wide receiver. And Bryce Young, if he's going to be able to improve upon the way he played in the second half of last season, I think there's a ton of upside here for Tet. This team that's going to be playing from behind. They're going to have to catch up. They're going to be throwing the ball. I think Dave Canales is going to be a perfect fit for this system, for this offense with Tet here. So I'm in on him for sure. Now we're left with the D and F tier. And a lot of these guys are not going to be super appealing. They're bye-week fill-ins. Some of these guys do have definite talent. Jordan Addison, he would be much higher on this list, but unfortunately we're dealing with the potential suspension, similar to Rashee Rice, and not as good of a situation as having Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback, so he's going to be a little bit lower in this list. Chris Godwin, it's a shame seeing him so low, but I have real concerns with him on that ankle. Chris Olave, the quarterback situation, another guy that's you're used to seeing them higher, but the quarterback situation over there, Spencer Rattler, whoever else I want to throw out there, looks pitiful. Now, some guys that do have some actual upside. Deebo Samuel, I think he is washed at this point, but if Terry McLaurin ends up going away, he's going to get the targets, but man, he does not look spry these days, which concerns me, but he would definitely be in line for some work. Juwan Jennings, wide receiver situation there is a bit messy, but he's definitely got the clear path to being the wide receiver 1 in that offense, and we saw last season he is capable of having some pretty monster games. He actually had one of the best games I've ever seen from a wide receiver last season. At one point, his overall numbers in the season aren't anything spectacular, but was able to get 3 league games last year and 3 good ones, but kind of a bit of a carousel there. But Brandon Ayuk's injured. Ricky Purcell, he's going to obviously still target George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey. I think Christian McCaffrey is just the main guy you want in that offense, plus George Kittle personally. George Pickens, I think, has some upside with Dak Prescott. Like I said earlier, I do like the passing attack. Was in Pittsburgh last year. Obviously, he's a bit of a head case. That's the only issue with George Pickens, and maybe Dallas isn't the best place to be if you are a bit of a head case, but the talent's certainly there. And CeeDee Lamb cannot get the ball every single play. So George Pickens is definitely going to be viable. Rome Odunze, I just like the Bears offense in general. This year, they're pretty cheap. Ben Johnson coming in. I think Caleb Williams is going to be on the up and up, and that should help a guy like Odunze. Plus, Keenan Allen is going to be out. They did bring in Luther Burden from the draft. In Ben Johnson's history with slot receivers is actually pretty solid. I do have him in the F tier. Basically, the F tier is full of rookies with upside. Travis Hunter, Ibuka, Matthew Golden, Jaden Higgins, Luther Burden. I think Travis Hunter, if I didn't say him, all those guys have upside, but with them being rookies, it's kind of hard to know where they're going to place. But I mean, there's some real value in there. Matthew Golden, he's kind of in that carousel of the Green Bay Packers wide receiver situation, which I hate because you have Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Christian Watson. It's like, where is the ball going to go? I mean, he's the guy with the most talent, at least in my opinion. Jaden Reed's there, but he can disappear, completely ghost you for games. It's just very trust any of those wide receivers over in Green Bay. Travis Hunter, it's going to be a unique situation. We know he's extremely talented, but full-time role, what's he going to do on the defensive side of things? That's the only issue. But I mean, he has all the talent in the world. He could easily move into that C tier, D tier, depending on how they use him. Jaden Higgins is another guy that I think has a pretty good path to getting some work, especially over that Texans offense. No Stephon Diggs now. Tank Dell got hurt very late in the season last year, has absolutely destroyed his leg. So I think he's got some real upside to getting some good playing time and potential work from CJ Stroud. And if he's able to impress early on, that could just put him in a really nice solidified role as the wide receiver too. And that offense, Ibuka, I definitely think he's the guy to want over Chris Godwin currently. We'll have to see how that plays out throughout the entire season when Chris Godwin maybe gets more acclimated back into the offense coming off that injury. But I think early on, Ibuka is definitely a little bit more appealing. Everything else here, it's just a little nasty. These are just bye-week fill-ins, flyers if your guy goes down or you're playing them in the right matchup. The Colts wide receivers, Josh Downs and Michael Pittman, when they had Joe Flacco, were extremely viable. I mean, they were able to have great games. Anthony Richardson under center or Daniel Jones, especially with Anthony Richardson. If Anthony Richardson's under center, I don't trust them at all. I mean, I'm not going to say they're unplayable, but it's not going to feel good. Daniel Jones would be a slight upgrade, but even then it's like, yeah. It's Daniel Jones, and these guys are not as talented as Malik Neighbors, of course. But with that being said, that's all for today's video, so I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, or even if you didn't, make sure you like down below. Subscribe if you're brand new. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or want to talk about your own rankings or whoever I have ranked, be my guest. But I wish you all the best, and I'll see y'all next time for Tight Ends.